Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by the magnanimous Sarah Gon. Sarah, how are you today? How are things?
I'm feeling truly magnanimous.
And we are also joined by the other half of the Daily Friend Show crew, Mr. Alex Weiss. Alex, how are you today, sir?
Very well, Nicholas. It's good to be with you.
Yes, no, it's good to have you on the show instead of making things work, also contributing to the fun we like to have here. It's very good to have you here. So let's dive into the news. Now, we've talked about this story before because it was just sort of weird, and that is the story of Tracy Zille. So this is a Twitter account that popped up on Twitter a couple of years ago, and it was a picture of a sort of random middle-aged white woman, and her name was Tracy Zille, apparently, and she would give advice to people of other races, particularly Black South Africans. And this advice was always kind of racially tinged, race baiting. You people are so dumb that allows us whites to exploit you, that kind of stuff. It was clear very quickly that this Tracy Zille person was certainly not who she claimed to be. For one, the name was a bit weird, and also the way she talked was very obviously not what you would expect from someone of that kind of demographic. Anyway, this Twitter account kind of blew up, and it took South African Twitter by storm, pulled up 30,000 followers, I think, in a very short amount of time. And there was an investigation launched to find out who exactly is this Tracy Zille person. Well, it turned out soon that it was, in fact, a EFF councillor from Limpopo, a guy called Anthony Mtumba, and that he was basically using this Twitter account as a way to sell some products that he was involved in, as well as generally worsen race relations in the country, and promotes an EFF view of the world. He was taken to the South African Human Rights Commission because he had said racist things on Twitter. Apparently, that's all the South African Human Rights Commission does, but anyway. And he came in for a lot of flack. It seems, however, that the EFF has a very different view of his escapades, which is that they've now decided to promote him to being a member of parliament. He is a councillor no more. So according to a news story on, I think it's News 24, the EFF has decided that Mr. Mtumba is going to be sworn in as an MP, filling a vacancy on their parliamentary list, and he will be sworn in this week. He still denies that he was ever connected to this account, but some of the evidence that has been found is pretty clear that he was connected. The sanction leveled against him by the South African Human Rights Commission was that he was supposed to donate 20,000 rand to a charitable organization, expressly with victims of gender-based violence. Weird. So I thought we'd never be talking about this story again, and I thought that would probably be the end of Anthony Mtumba's career. I thought he would just sort of sit in Limpopo as an EFF councillor for the rest of his days, but it appears that in EFF, they value different things to what other parties value. Sarah, what do you make of this?
Well, I don't know why he's not admitting to being, to being the account holder, because his account is an expression of race nationalism, and a requirement for you to become an EFF MP is to be a race nationalist. And I would have thought that makes him the perfect candidate to be an MP in representing the EFF in Parliament. The only problem is that with his party having expressed pleasure at the burning down of the new assembly, he won't get a chance to really strut his stuff the way his party is well known for strutting. And I look, I think, as I say, I think for the reality with a guy like this is that what we would see as a disadvantage and a deficit, the EFF would see as qualifications. The basis for putting a man for putting a man there. And I'm sure he'll enjoy himself, but he would have enjoyed himself more had the parliament, which the EFF was so glad to see burned down, hadn't burned down. But, you got to be careful what you wish for.
On that front, in one of his sort of rambling press conferences that Malema likes to give these days, where literally everything he says, regardless of how much credibility he has, gets reported, Malema thinks his personal theory is that it was due to rats eating the cables that the parliament burned down. Anyway, so Alex, you're one of our social media guys. You pay a lot of attention to what goes on social media. You didn't follow the Tracy Zille story from the beginning, but the account picked up quite a lot of steam. And so my question to you is twofold. Firstly, sort of, what do you make of this? And secondly, why do you think it caught fire in the way that it did?
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact that he's going to be an MP is not entirely surprising from a qualification criteria, as Sarah says. I think probably he'll just have to test his ability to throw water bottles and dance along the aisles in Parliament. But I think what's quite frustrating from this character is that, obviously, particularly in my position within the broader Institute of Race Relations, is to counter race nationalism, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a team of very bright people to make that happen, and to build up a following, and to build up a message that people can get behind. And one's going up against what is arguably in South Africa the most difficult clickbaity, riling up emotional message there is out there. So in one sense, I'm impressed at how swiftly it was acted upon, as considering the noise that these kind of issues can generate. But yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that he gained so much steam. And I think I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. I mean, just with the latest going on at CSA with Mark Barcher and the social justice and nation building hearings into allegations of racism and the like from decades gone by. The gentleman chairing the hearing, I think it's Advocate Motau, the last thing he chaired was an investigation into VBS. And now we've got him looking into this, and it's arguably what's doing more damage from a race relations point of view. One guy who's funneling money to his own back pocket with some pretty impressive race nationalism, or alleged systemic racism in the sporting code. So I think we can definitely expect fireworks when Parliament returns in some form.
I can't remember what the figure is exactly. My father told me what it was recently. I've forgotten, but a very significant percentage of the EFF MPs are turned over all the time. They always have people resigning or getting fired from Parliament by the EFF leadership. This happens on a very routine basis. In fact, I think something like half of their MPs don't finish their term, which is really weird. So, Sarah, any thoughts on that's presumably why Anthony Mtumba now has this vacancy was available for him, is that there's this high turnover in the EFF caucus. So, any final thoughts on this, and why the EFF is so
what that suggests is that there's a sort of Stalinesque like quality in the leadership of the EFF, because what did Stalin do? He exiled or murdered his close associates after a few years, just so that no one got comfortable or too close, or was in a position to do harm to Stalin himself. So the best way to do it and to make the successors nervous was to get rid of them. So maybe this is a sort of Stalin light approach to party governance, shall we say. I think that's anything one could really read into that.
I saw also the EFF had disbanded the entirety of their Limpopo structures and it appointed one of their top hombres to go and restore the province. And they said the reason they were doing this was because of its poor election performance. But I wonder whether that's because I seem to remember hearing that Limpopo was opposed to Julius, and so he's simply exercising his power as leader.
I would go with the latter, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I suspect so too. Any final thoughts, Alex, before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, just before the show, chatting about sort of the fact that he got caught out with this fake account was because some of the language that he used wasn't really in line with the stereotype that he was trying to portray. So I'd love to see a Tracy at Woolies Cafe saying, "Hey, buffet too, must mobilize." So yeah, I mean, even professionals sometimes slip up.
All right, so let's move on to our next story. And as everyone knows, mask mandates and COVID restrictions have been getting under a lot of people's skin for the entirety of the COVID pandemic. It's been very contentious, and it's become around the world a sort of symbol of kind of political alignment, is whether you're super pro mask or super anti-mask, which I think is just really silly. And the whole debate is, I think, really draining and unpleasant. That being said, though, we now have a South African professor, that being Sabir Mahdi, who you can check out an interview with him on the Center for Risk Analysis channel, which are our friends over there. It's a great interview. And breaking from a lot of the kind of establishment view at the moment, Sabir, Professor Mahdi says, there's no point in continuing with the mask mandate, especially with how Omicron spreads. Most people are still using the material masks, which don't really prevent infection, even though it can stop the spread of droplets. In that context, there's little value for mask wearing in outdoor spaces. You could maybe make a case for face coverings indoors in poorly ventilated spaces, but not even throughout the year. If we want masks to work, we need the right types, and cloth ones don't protect us from infection. The days of mask wearing are now obsolete. He also went on to say that the regulations to restrict COVID in general are now completely obsolete, that 75% of the country has been infected. So if they did work, they're not going to work much more, because we've kind of already passed a significant number of infections, and there's not that much evidence that they did work anyway in the first place. And he says that it's time now to just dump these. So, Alex, what do you make of this? Do you think that this is now that we're having kind of someone who I would say is much more respected by the mainstream? He's a professor at Wits, he's a virologist. Now that he's kind of breaking, do you think that we're really going to see the end of a lot of the restrictions around COVID in South Africa?
Well, look, considering we're in the 23rd month of state of disaster, I think the chances are slim. No, I think there could be a good chance. I think this could also be perhaps quite a quick political win for the Cyril Ramaphosa presidency. I don't think anecdotally, at least, it seems like the sort of the energy for masks is definitely diminishing. We sort of coming down from our most recent wave. It's getting warm again. I mean, we saw temperatures over 40 degrees in the Cape. Not pleasant to wear a mask in. And I think particularly with this latest bout of COVID with the Omicron variant, a lot of people have had it. I had it myself. Certainly there are deaths, but people's own experience of it is I think perhaps informing their desire for it. So I think there could be a lot to go for getting rid of them. But fingers crossed. But I think just as a final thought, in the greater context of are masks the final clinging on factor for the command council? We'll have to wait and see.
It'll be interesting to see whether the President Ramaphosa has made these kind of noises that he might maybe end the state of disaster next month. Long overdue, but good stuff if he does. Although I suspect the command council's not going anywhere anytime soon. Sarah, your thoughts on the whole sort of mask debate, whether you think everything is shifting now? Alex has seems to be suggesting here that the people are moving and government is kind of trying to catch up in a sense. What do you make of all this?
I think it's an opportunity for, as Alex says, for Cyril and the Command Council, excuse me, to take a win out of the fact that they've actually lost control of the management of the virus. Marty's been, even when he's gone against the advice that has been given to the Command Council, he's generally been proved right. He's a vaccinologist. And while it may still for a while, they may be worn inside, I think it's a very good opportunity to get rid of wearing them outside, because it costs very little, and it's supported by what Marty says about the fact that cloth masks and most masks don't operate very well, notwithstanding that the manner in which it's spread. It also is an opportunity because of it's spread through droplets. It's also an opportunity to get rid of the hand sanitizing, because it doesn't get transmitted by surface contact.
It's actually on that point, It's incredible that there was this huge messaging campaign at the beginning. No, we think it's surface transmission. And then when later studies came out that showed that wasn't really the case, there was no sort of follow-up messaging on that. It was just like, oh, well, no, people must just sanitize.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, of course, what you get is that we kind of a lot of us know that now. So it's very frustrating. I mean, if you're going to a mall and you go from one shop to the other, every time you have to squish sanitizer on your hands, I mean, you end up with a dermatitis of note if you're not careful. It's absolutely relevant. And there's something slightly insulting about simply not telling people to do away with it, not to mention the few places where you have to fill in your name and your contact details, because contact tracing came and went very early on in South Africa because of demand. So if you want to say, let's get rid of the crisis, there's a state of disaster, masks, for the time being, we strongly recommend wearing masks in indoor public places. I think South Africa, along with its identification of Omicron, could be a sort of world trendsetter and look really like they're doing something bold and creative and courageous, even if it is just responding to the fact that whatever's happened and the extent to which people have immunity is not that much because of what the government has done.
Despite the fact, I think that a lot of people are kind of still treating COVID like it is back in the April of 2020. It does seem to me as though things are definitively changing. I think the UK now has pretty much abandoned all restrictions, and I suspect an enormous number of countries will follow suit afterwards. Alex, any final thoughts on this?
Yeah. Also, I mean, on the weekend, I went to go and play sport out in the open, and I was still getting asked to take my temperature. So again, it's just a lot of these, we have better information now. We know what the situation is. But I think it would be nice if the government would stop telling us what to do. I think there is a sort of a sort of pseudo safety that a mask gives you. You feel kind of protected. So I can understand why people would want to wear it. But it would be great if we could just have the choice, let restaurateurs decide whether they want their patrons to use them, let shop owners in malls decide if they want their people to use them. So I think, as with disbanding the Command Council, as with ending the state of disaster, it would be great just to get a little bit of personal liberty back, and so we don't sweat around our mouths in the middle of summer.
Well, basically, you want to get rid of having your temperature taken if you're standing in the slips.
Exactly.
It's enough. It's a joke. It's enough. We need some credit needs to be given to the fact that we were, by and large, have been compliant.
All right, so let's move on to our last story for today, and that is about the city of Johannesburg, which, as anyone who's been following the news closely will know, it's been a very contentious takeover by the new government. It was unexpected at first because The EFF supported the DA candidate, as did Action SA, despite the fact that they didn't have any sort of formal agreement. Then there was a disruption of, I think it was basically 2 council meetings by the EFF and the ANC, so that was pretty hectic stuff. And now an interesting press statement has come out from the MMC, that's basically like the minister in the city, member of the mayoral committee is what it stands for development planning. So this is the department of the city of Joburg which approves planning and checks whether buildings are up to code, and it basically gives you permission if you want to build something new or change a building. The MMC for development planning, who's I think a DA member, has put out a press statement saying that she thinks that a recent series of burglaries at the development planning offices might very well be an inside job. So the inside job here, she says that the department has been trying to move to an electronic system with regards to development planning applications to make the system easier to go through and to keep better track of it. And she claims in her press statement that there are some people inside the department who want to disrupt this process. And she doesn't say explicitly that it's an inside job, but she kind of implies it quite strongly. Apparently, recently there have been 2 separate robberies where computers have been very specifically targeted in the department, where the thieves broke in and stole things like the hard drives, the RAM from the computers, the components, basically just to break them down so that they couldn't work. She said, quote, "Through its implementation, development planning will enhance the operational efficiency and good governance of the department, and that there are people who want to take advantage of the current inefficiency of the system." Interesting stuff. And I think it really speaks to the difficulties of doing major reforms in a lot of South Africa's metros. There is a chunk of the civil service that is just absolutely committed to personal enrichment, wealth extraction, corruption, that kind of thing. That's the way it's been done for at least a couple of years now. Sarah, what do you make of this? I mean, is this conspiracy theory mongering by an MMC who's just come into power to excuse her poor performance, or do you think that there's a very real chance that in fact this was an inside job and they are right to be concerned?
Well, let me put it this way. Years of being a labor lawyer taught me that 99% of the theft from any company is an inside job. So you can probably assume the same applies to theft from government. It has to be, because somebody has to know where the stuff is and to get hold of it. The rest is up to security, good or bad or otherwise. In the context of a municipality, and particularly a municipality as large as Joburg, I think the conspiracy theory idea is not far-fetched, because town planning, everything to do with planning and the granting of permission to build, etc., is a natural for corruption. I mean, it's people desperately want permission to do something, or they want the authority to do something. They go to the department, and if it takes long enough and it's fractious enough and it's annoying enough, they probably don't even get to that point. It's a very obvious sight of bribing somebody to get something done. And 2 thoughts come to that. One is, I would imagine that if they're not yet computerized, which 27 years into democracy is almost unbelievable, that there would be resistance to it, because as soon as something is computerized, it doesn't make it impossible to be corrupt, but it's much easier to take a file out of a pile, a paper file, and make sure it disappears or goes in another direction or isn't found at a crucial point. When you computerize, everyone has access to the same information, so it's much more difficult to make information sort of disappear or change it. And so I wouldn't say that's far-fetched at all. But, this is South Africa, and they are computers, and they're probably not particularly well guarded. Security is probably a little bit lax. So just theft for the sake of theft, that's a good possibility as well. But having lived in Joburg all my life and been subject to the vicissitudes of poor performance in the city council, I favour the conspiracy theory.
As do I. So I've been pretty concerned about the opposition's takeover of it, especially the city of Joburg. I think that this is completely my own view that they're not in a politically strong enough position to make it work, because you don't just have a contentious council meeting, as we've seen over the last couple of council sessions where they've actually been disrupted and there's been charges of assault laid by the mayor. But you also have a civil service which is so infiltrated by sort of cadres and corrupt elements, and that to try and fix things requires, I would say, something akin to a deep steam clean when it comes to the city of Joburg, especially. Alex, what do you make of this? I mean, what do you think this says about the task of repairing the metros in general?
Yeah, a difficult one, for sure. But what concerns me is that this might be an indicator of what's to come in the next, say, 4 or 5 years, leading at least up until 2029 national elections. Are we going to see this kind of thing across the board as gradually as the ANC loses more power? And I mean, the thing is, I guess we in South Africa, we kind of always, when these kind of things happen, we kind of treading on a thin line, or sitting on the fence of, do we fall on the side of malice? Do we fall on the side of incompetence? I think particularly in this instance, I would probably back the MMC's claims. But it's just very unfortunate that at the end of the day, it's the citizens that pay the price. And I think what's also quite upsetting is that for any aspirant, honest, I suppose, sort of young politicians or people who are looking to improve their communities by running for office and getting politically involved, when you look at the kind of things that you're up against, I suspect that the best intentioned might be a little bit dissuaded from actually trying to change things. So yeah, all strength to those who try their hardest despite the odds.
Yeah, I think that's actually an under-discussed point, which is that if you're a politician and you're not corrupt, you don't necessarily make an enormous amount of money. At least, you don't necessarily make more than you would if you went into the private sector. So when you see, the difficulties of the job lying ahead, it's no surprise that a lot of people who might potentially have gone into politics, choose to instead go into, I don't know, corporate PR or go overseas. You don't think of politics as being a realm where we do experience brain drain. We always talk about like lawyers and doctors and whatever as being the symptoms of brain drain. But I think it's very true that it happens in our politics as well. I think that's a good point, Alex.
Well, I mean, Nick, if I can just add, I mean, if as a large example, sort of Eskom is a great example, and I've spoken to engineers who used to work at Eskom, and I think the remuneration is pretty big, but to keep guys there is very, very difficult. And so I think going into this kind of post ANC world, it's going to be I think it will take a lot. It'll be stymied, at least the path to rebuilding what has really crumbled generally, particularly in Johannesburg, but I guess across the country as well.
Indeed. Yeah, and I suspect that while Joburg may be one of the worst hit, Ekurhuleni is also probably going to be very difficult to change in any serious ways. I suspect that pretty much all the metros, Durban, Pretoria, are going to encounter similar problems. Any final thoughts on this, Sarah, before we close for today?
Yeah, 2 pieces of advice. The one is to the citizens of Joburg is don't be too upset about if the municipality doesn't deliver because of the fragility of the coalition and what you're dealing with and the people that work there. And the second is actually to the people who work there. And that is, if you actually sit down, do your job properly and don't be corrupt, you have no reason to lose your job. You're not a politician. You're not a parliamentarian. You can actually retain your job just by doing your job because you are in the public service. You have continuity. So the advice is get your act together if your act isn't together. and you'll survive post ANC.
Yeah, no, that's a good message. Cool. All right. Well, that is it for today. So thank you very much to both Alex and Sarah for coming on. Thanks to everyone for listening and watching. We will, of course, see you tomorrow for the final episode of the week. I hope you all have a most magnificent day. Please check out thedailyfriend.co.za, which is our website with opinion and the occasional news story as well. It's always a great read. Anyway, we'll see you guys around. Have a good one. Cheers.